Hey everyone, and welcome to this naming ionic and covalent bonds review. Let's get started. Let me get my pointer out. So let's review the periodic table really quick. Over here, we've got our metals, and over here, we've got our non-metals. Now, don't forget about hydrogen. Hydrogen likes to hang out with the metals. It's just the way that the periodic table is set up. But don't forget, hydrogen is a non-metal. All right, so let's talk about the differences between ionic and covalent compounds. So first off, ionic compounds are made up of a metal and a non-metal. Ionic compounds also give and take electrons. They also have no prefixes. They do not have prefixes in their name. And a little fun fact is that they're typically salts. Now on to covalent compounds. Covalent compounds are made up of two or more non-metals. That's important to know. Covalent compounds also share electrons, and they use prefixes in their names, like mono, di, tri, tetra. So that's important to know. Covalent does use prefixes. So I've got a little sample problem here for y'all. So I've got calcium and bromine. So I've got this first question. Is it ionic or covalent? Well, let's go back to our periodic table. We've got calcium. Calcium here is a metal. And then bromine over here is a non-metal. So going back to our T-chart, made up of a metal and a non-metal, that's an ionic compound. All right, now what about the charge on calcium? So let's go on back to our periodic table. We've got calcium here, and elements that fall in this column typically have a +2 charge. Well, not typically, they do. They have a +2 charge. So here we are, charge on calcium, +2. Now let's look at bromine. Bromine's over here. And notice it's right next to the noble gases. And the noble gases never have charges on them because their valence electrons, their octet is completely full. They don't want any electrons. They're good. I'm fine. So bromine needs one more electron. So due to that, it'll gain one more electron for it to be happy. So it'll have a -1 charge. So let's talk about those charges again. So calcium, the reason why calcium has a +2 charge is because it loses its 2 electrons. It yeets them off. And so there are now more protons than there are electrons, because like I said, the electrons are gone. So with more protons, it now has a +2 charge. Whereas with bromine, bromine wants another electron so that its octet can be happy. So it gains an electron. And when something gains an electron, there are now more electrons than there are protons. So now it has a negative charge. So that's why we get these +2s, because it loses electrons, and a -1 because it gains electrons. Well, back to this. Let's do the crisscross with its formula. So we've got a 2 on calcium, 1 on bromine. That means it's going to be calcium and bromine 2. So calcium bromide. And I just gave you the name. Calcium bromide. No prefixes. No prefixes on its name. So it's not calcium dibromide. That's not right. All right, let's move on to another example. We've got our periodic table. We've got our chart. Now here we have another example. All right, carbon and 4 chlorines. I added the ×4, so that way you know there are 4 of them. Ionic or covalent? Well, let's go on back to our periodic table. Carbon, chlorine. Both of them are non-metals. So if it's made up of 2 or more non-metals, that's a covalent compound. Now, how many carbon atoms do we have? 1. We've got 1 carbon atom. What about how many chlorine atoms do we have? I added this. So that means that there are 4. So we've got 1 carbon, 4 chlorine atoms. It's a covalent compound. Its name's going to be CCl4. What is the name of that? So remember, covalent compounds do have prefixes. So its name is going to be carbon tetrachloride. Notice there is 1 carbon, but I didn't mention carbon or monocarbon tetrachloride. That is because if there is 1 atom as like the first one, you can drop the mono. Saying monocarbon tetrachloride, that's a mouthful. Just like you don't need to say like 1x. You can drop that. You can drop the 1, the mono, only on the first element. Say if it were on the second element, like say there were only 1 chlorine, there was only 1 chlorine, then you need to say carbon monochloride. But that doesn't happen, FYI, because of the octet rule and stuff like that. Anyway, I hope this review was helpful for y'all. Thank you very much.